Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Hedegaard, for the introduction. Thank you to C40 and the city of Copenhagen for welcoming me and everyone in this movement to your city. And I'd especially like to thank the activists and advocates, indigenous peoples, scientists, and climate realists who are largely responsible for making this moment happen. I'd also like to thank the mayors, officials, and everyday people who are joining us here and watching from afar today. I was honestly a little bit surprised and incredibly humbled to be invited here today to speak on the issue of the climate crisis and the Green New Deal. Back in the United States, many of us advocating on this issue have garnered a bit of a reputation as troublemakers and radicals. So in that spirit, I will not waste much time, and I want to move to speak with candor, frank honesty, truth, and frankly, scientific consensus. It's no secret that we are meeting here today at a very perilous juncture, a crossroads, one of extinction or opportunity. And every decision we make between now and in our children's lifetimes will determine how human life will fare, whether we suffer greatly or build together. It is our choice. To the chagrin of many of the politicians and voters, I am sad to report that there is no middle road on the climate crisis. We will either address the problem meaningfully and in accordance with scientific consensus, or we will not. The statement is not a matter of radicalism, it is a matter of fact, of policy, and of science. And many of the decisions we make, particularly as executives and policymakers, will either contribute to destruction or preservation. And that contribution is measured in the form of emissions, injustice, and inequality. As elected officials, we have an obligation to tell the truth. And in many different junctures and moments, we have not. Not on this issue, not fully, and certainly not in our policy. Many of us have read the science, have been briefed by the world's experts, and have seen the projections and implications in our communities. Yet we speak in broad terms, as though we do not know the things that we know. We do not speak often enough about this crisis in real, human, understandable terms. And that impulse is understandable. Because when we speak in the terms that scientists are urging us to, we can be easily labeled as alarmists, or if you are not a man, hysterical. In my own community in the United States, in New York City, all three major airports servicing the world's most complex airspace are projected to be flooded, in part or whole, by 2080. That is given our current trajectory and accounting for optimism in our actions. Through the fault of human cognitive bias, which lulls us into discounting the value of our future, the year 2080 seems like an abstraction. But if I were to have a child in the next few years, he, she, or they will have to contend with a world where some of our most precious critical infrastructure goes underwater, or our most staple and widely used crops struggle to grow and feed our population. Even if we don't want to think about our children, we can think about ourselves. By 2030, according to researchers at the University of Washington-Madison and the University of Oregon, quote, seawater is likely to submerge some 4,000 miles of internet cable in the United States and engulf more than 1,000 data centers that house servers, routers, and other hardware by the end of this decade. And that is just in our privileged pocket of some of the wealthiest areas in the most privileged nations in the world. Money alone will not save us. And right now, federal governments are failing to act. The United States, to the horror of the world, withdrew from the Paris Agreement. But despite that, Many of the other actors in charge of some of the most advanced and wealthiest economies have withdrawn from the agreement in action. Not a single one is on track to meet their Paris goals. Deeper still, we don't have to project 1 minute into our future to see that the climate crisis is already here. On this note, I speak to you not as an elected official or public figure, but I speak to you as a human being, a woman whose dreams of motherhood now taste bittersweet because of what I know about our children's future, and that our actions are responsible for bringing their most dire possibilities into focus. I speak to you as a daughter and descendant of colonized peoples who have already begun to suffer. Just 2 years ago, one of the deadliest disasters in the United States struck in the form of Hurricane Maria. The climate change-powered storm killed over 3,000 Puerto Ricans, American citizens. My own grandfather died in the aftermath, all because they were living under colonial rule, which contributed to the dire conditions and lack of recovery. This year, we saw Hurricane Dorian wreak similar ravage in the Bahamas. And that is not a coincidence. As many have noticed noted in an awful turn, the climate crisis's path is first impacting those who have not only contributed to our emissions the least, but have already suffered greatly in the global history of inequality, colonization, and imperialism, stacking one injustice upon another. But this is everyone's loss, too. And no person is insulated from this reality, because many of the people ravaged and marginalized in our current regimes, the lineages of farmers, indigenous peoples, and tightly knit communities, also have knowledge of many of the practices that are our solutions as well. So it is no secret that many of our scientific conclusions reinforce indigenous wisdom and practices cultivated over thousands of years. It is not a coincidence that these disasters get relatively little media coverage, and that even less of the coverage dares to mention climate change. It is not a coincidence that the truth is controversial. None of this is a coincidence, because climate change is not a coincidence or a scientific anomaly. Climate change is a consequence. It is a consequence of our unsustainable way of life, because it is unsustainable to organize our society as we have, centered on prioritizing personal gain and profit over any and all human or planetary considerations. It is unsustainable to naively believe that building a wall can shield ourselves from humanity's collective destiny. It is unsustainable to promote amnesia around gross injustices and ignorance of our past, to abdicate responsibility simply because it was our ancestors who committed them and not us. Our children bear responsibility for our inaction, despite the fact that they didn't make the choice. And frankly, it is unsustainable to continue to believe that our system of runaway, unaccountable, law-breaking pursuit of profit, whose inequality is so socially destabilizing that it is giving rise to authoritarians who burn our forests and challenge the democracies that listen to basic science, and to think that that has nothing to do with this. It is unsurprising that this juncture coincides with a political moment of stark contrasts, that we must choose whether this moment will lead us to regression or evolution, authoritarianism or greater democracy, extraction or preservation. Our greatest choice is to move towards a cooperative, collaborative world that aligns with scientific consensus, whose economies center and benefit the middle and lower classes and the marginalized, which is to say, most people, and who honor the inherent value of all human dignity and can put everyone to work. All of this means that rising to the challenge of the climate crisis demands not only that we act meaningfully, but also that we change society. The two are inextricable. Our current logic created this mess, and operating in the same way will not get us out. Changing society for the better is the most sustainable thing we can do, and meeting the climate crisis will require the largest economic mobilization we may have ever tried to pursue as a human species. And that is what a Green New Deal is all about: preserving our planet with a just transition focused on economic opportunity, jobs and justice, peace and prosperity. Simply put, to get the job done, much of the industrialized world, the developing world, the global south, all of us, will have to retrofit many of our buildings, change and update our energy grids, educate a labor pool in a myriad of different skills and capacities, work with regions to create just transitions for impacted workers and communities, and pursue some of the most ambitious civil engineering society has ever seen. And that should not be daunting, intimidating, or lead us to despair. It should be inspiring. Because this is the work of advancing societies, and we have been entrusted by the public to pursue it. To do any less is to stall or regress. We have two choices: to move forwards or backwards. Many of the places that will require attention and investment first are the frontline communities that have been historically neglected: rural areas, poor urban areas, indigenous lands. Again, this is not a coincidence or even a form of affirmative action. It is common sense. We have already invested virtually everywhere else, and much of those places will enjoy continued attention due to their existing political and economic power. Now we must invest in the places left behind to not only catch up, but leapfrog to the future. And much of this work of this scale has been done before. It is possible. We have mobilized on a massive scale for war, and our only test of leadership is if we have the political will to mobilize on that scale for anything else. At the present moment, solving the climate crisis is no longer a primarily scientific question. It is now a political one. The scientists have done much of their job, and now it is the time for us to do ours. Just as they have created the technologies and identified the targets, we must create the political will. A Green New Deal centers the leadership of frontline communities, from miners to farmers, to indigenous communities, working and poor communities, and urban communities alike. Not only because it is the right thing to do, it is, nor because it is where we can find solutions, we can, but also because it is the winning political coalition that can empower change. The Green New Deal is an economic boon for the many that contrasts with the current profits of planetary extraction that benefit the very few. And with that, I think we have our work cut out for us. But to paraphrase a prior US president who pioneered the original New Deal, forged in a time of great economic desperation, quote, "We face the arduous days that lie before us in the warm courage of global unity, with the clear consciousness of seeking old and precious moral values. We do not distrust the future of essential democracy. The people have not failed. In their need, they have registered a mandate that they want direct, vigorous action. They have asked for discipline and direction under leadership. They have made us the present instrument of their wishes, and in the spirit of that gift, we should take it. In this dedication of a world, we humbly ask for a blessing. May we be protected, each and every one of us, and may we be guided in the days to come." Thank you very much.